My God, RenderCon, we did it. We did it. I can't believe this is real. It's not rendered, it's real. Wow, it's so amazing to see so many people here and to sort of culminate the last 20 years, at least for me, in this amazing event. More to come, hopefully. But we're here to talk about the future of rendering, of many other things. The world today is just moving so fast, and there's a lot to cover today. I'm excited by the speakers we have, the things that we're showing. The actual venue itself is beautiful. Hopefully, you guys will get a chance to see everything. But before we talk about the future of rendering, it's important to sort of consider how we got here. And a big part of my journey here, in fact, a huge part of it, has been with a close friend, colleague, and mentor for 21 years, Ari Emanuel. Let's bring him in. Ari, are you there?
Hey, everybody.
Ari. So, yeah, it was
I hate that you said 21 years.
It is 21 years. It was 2004, August of 2004. You showed up at my mom's house. And, and I think you remember the story better than I do. And yeah,
it was a Saturday night.
Yeah. And I was having dinner with Rod at a sushi. I remember getting a call saying somebody named Ari is going to show up at your house. I had no idea who you were. I'd never watched Andres, nothing. And then the start of a beautiful friendship began, 21 years ago. And what a journey it is.
21 years ago, you had computers in one room with the shag carpeting in the valley.
Yeah.
All the way up to the ceiling, kind of two banks of it. And you were showing me a Star Trek ship floating through just a web.
It's like a portal.
I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Web portal. And you started, at that point, you put diapers on me about CPUs and GPUs.
Yeah, I sort of onboarded Ari to the GPU world back in 2004. And I took a patent. That's my first patent, was on the enterprise going through one window to another, which was, one of many things that I was working on 20 years ago. But yeah, that's where it began. And I remember also early on, I wanted to work in films and things like that, but I remember I told you I needed 2 years of hard coding to get GPUs, cloud rendering, all this stuff to work. And I had you, in 2006, I told you, I'm ready to really get OTOY started. And that's when we began, getting in more people and everything. But it's been crazy. I mean, the movie business, of course, has changed so much. I mean, everything that we were doing about, trying to get all that to change. I mean, how do you see the film business right now? What state is it in from your perspective?
Well, let's just go back a little bit. Let's go back, because then you started doing, for Transformers,
2007.
You started making little shorts for Transformers, and at that point, I think I sent them to 3 directors. I think I sent it to Michael Bay, David Fincher, and J.J. Abrams. And they all were like, I don't know if you're going to show them, but they were all blown away by what you had done. I didn't know if those were on GPUs, but or how you.
They were. It was all early GPU rendering. 2006 and 2007, and we both showed them.
And then right after that, who was the guy that had stitched together all the computers that we thought was competition, and then it didn't work?
Online.
Remember that
Steve
one
Perlman.
guy?
Yeah.
Online.
Yeah. 2009. That was a thing.
That was a joke.
Yeah, well, it was. Yeah. I'm not going to say it, but it's crazy. The sort of battles that we've been through and things we've seen come and go over the decades. I mean, Steve Perlman, he was friends with Fincher actually, and he had a capture system like Lightstage, a little different. But it's funny. I mean, 15 years later, people don't even remember it really. But the thing that's funny is that the GPU is always at the center of it. And I think in 2004, when we first started this, NVIDIA's worth $3.7 billion. It's 1,000 times that now. And, the world is not GPU rendering.
They were only at that point, I think, doing video game chips.
Yeah.
I recall. Yeah.
And it was Fincher, actually, that got us going. Because, the way that I ended up talking to first AMD was through David Fincher. He had contacts, at AMD, and I started doing demos. And then Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, got wind of that and pulled me over to the NVIDIA side, and that's how we sort of got going with him. But it began really, I mean, all the doors you opened at the very beginning really led to all the things that came after through these weird sort of circuitous
But don't you
paths.
remember we also talked to, I was in Abu Dhabi, and we talked to the CEO of AMD at the time before I don't remember. And then we met with the one group there, and we tried to help them redesign their GPU kind of processing power.
Yeah,
We couldn't
AMD.
get done.
It was Dirk Meyer, and then it was first the founder of AMD.
Dirk Meyer, that's right.
Yeah, and I was on stage with him, and then he got fired a week later, 2 weeks later, which is so the original plan with AMD was we were going to build a GPU cloud. In those days, it was unheard of. People thought I was crazy. GPUs, what? In a server? No, and they didn't see it. I mean, he saw it, and then the board fired him.
I still didn't really understand everything you were saying. I just went with it and put you in rooms with people.
Yeah.
And they kept on saying, this never is going to happen, never going to happen. It's kind of a crazy path to where we're at now.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of it'll never happen. And you put me in the room, and I remember there's some early Pixar guys saying you cannot do ray tracing on a GPU; it can't be done. And now it's done, right? So many things like that. But yeah, it's and of course now we have AI and people are so accustomed now though to the power of the transformative power of technology and how it's affecting everything. But I still love for me, I mean, all of this started because I wanted to make games and movies with technology that was magical. GPUs helped with that. I mean, it was a way of, if you think about taking an old system on a CPU and putting it in parallel on a GPU, you can unlock all these problems, including AI, including rendering, and we've been doing that. And I remember, do you remember I did a chatbot in 2008? It was very similar to ChatGPT. It didn't use any of the newer stuff, but the idea was that could be on a GPU, and I had to pick two paths. Do I focus on rendering or AI? And I was like, I'm going to do rendering because it's just easier, and the world's probably not ready. I don't have enough data to feed anything in, but that was an early decision. So I feel like we've been.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other things I remember is we had a lot of meetings with studios.
Yeah.
And we talked to them. You capture one, if you use the light stage, you should capture all these assets.
Yep.
And then you could continually use them. So one, it would bring down costs. Two, you then could use it for the movie and then simultaneously build the game around it.
Yep.
And they could come almost out simultaneously as opposed to the structure now that takes so much time. And they would control those assets into the second movie, third movie, if the movie worked. So I think people are getting there now. I think with AI and your processing right now, that people are understanding what the potential is, especially, I don't know if you're going to show the Star Trek stuff or any of the other stuff that we've done. I think people realize that these assets can last over time. You don't have to recreate them, and the cost structure can kind of come down, which is actually crucial for Hollywood.
Yeah. No, it is. And it's funny, I mean, over the course of Light Stage, I think we scanned in every actor. The Light Stage has done every Marvel and DC movie. We scanned in The Rock 5 times, and I think, he's your client, right? And he would, the 5th time he's telling Clay, Light Stage.
Also, Robert Downey you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everyone, multiple times. So that was when, before COVID, I remember we were talking about, why don't we just have the actors own their likenesses, because that'll matter even more when AI and all these things. And we started on that process, and we were talking to everyone, from Tyler Perry to Kim Kardashian, all these. But I do think that now, this is the year where AI just explodes everywhere, and I think people are really sensitive to that, and all this groundwork that we've been laying out, I think is going to play out in a pretty relevant way. So,
well, everybody also realizes they don't know how to control their destiny, but they know that they have to.
Yeah.
And especially for actors, we're not there yet with writers, but I think we'll get there. I think it's less using render, but for actors, for sure, I'm probably eventually directors owning their image and being able to control their image and their estates controlling their image into the future, I think is crucial.
Yeah, it is. And we're, the Star Trek project that we're showing, I mean, we have one actor who passed away, which is Leonard Nimoy, and we have his son Adam here, who's going to be talking about his father's legacy. But, it is interesting. The Star Trek project we just did, we had the SAG agreements done finally, and we brought that to Shatner and the Nimoy estate, and we did it. And it was, it was one of the first tests of how digital replicas can work in this new world, and it went really well. And I think that, you opened one door, which is pretty crazy, is show it to David Ellison, right? And we did, and he, I think the response there was really positive, but also talking to him, it was interesting. Clearly, he's so tuned in to all the different things that are happening, and he honed in on the fact that what you're doing with characters and faces is something you can do in real time. I've never seen that. But obviously, just given the transformative things that are happening, I think even studio heads are just really aware now that you have to think about all this new technology. So it just seems to be playing out in these different ways across the board.
I think it's also the case, because last week I started talking to I'm going to mispronounce his name, maybe Sharim from now the White House, who's dealing with how to deal with copyright, trademark, et cetera. And the White House is thinking about, because it's, entertainment is such a big export for the country.
Well, you used to represent the president, right?
How they balance between technology companies that are doing AI and the Hollywood, and kind of factoring in that line between everybody, and the process and the royalty structure. I think it's hard, but they're starting to think about it. They're talking to a bunch of lawyers about it, and I'm gonna have them get in front of the guilds to think about it, so that there's a system by which everybody can benefit from them. But for sure, into the future, actors have got to go through your system so that they can control their destiny.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Render is all about. OTOY and Octane were where we began, but then Render was like, let's use all these GPUs, even if it's not Octane or Render, right? OTOY's Render. Let's just bring it all together. And one thing that the DeepSeek stuff showed is that you can run even this stuff that OpenAI was doing on much lower end GPUs. The whole premise of what we're doing a lot of our talks today is that, yeah, we can run on these lower end GPUs, also made by NVIDIA mostly, but also Apple, and distribute all this compute power. And maybe the whole, Silent thing where you're trying to build a $500 billion data center doesn't have to happen 3 or 4 years down the line as these GPUs get better. So that's definitely, our plan. And on that note, I think I want to get into the slides for everyone. And I love you. Thank you so much for being part of this amazing day. I mean, we're opening with you.
I'm so happy it's only 21 years, not 25, so I can actually think that I have a couple more years left in me.
Well, no, I think we got decades left in this adventure. I love you, Ari. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Enjoy,
Ari,
everyone.
everyone. Yeah, I mean, this journey that I really began with Ari, and it has been 20 years. So I want to take the next. I got 43 minutes, which is going to be hopefully enough to cover my my tech talk. And this sort of journey that I'm going to take you guys through will be a mixture of some tech, some hardcore stuff, and also just themes that some of which we touched on with Ari, and we'll be talking about with the other speakers and panelists. Many of you, and I think frankly the world is just familiar now with the transformative things you can do with generative AI and how a computer can create images. It wasn't always so obvious that this would be something that the masses could touch 20 years ago or even 10 or 5 years ago. But the way we look at things, at least from my perspective, has been we want to create tools that do allow people to create at all levels. If you want to create a high-end film, great. If you're a motion graphics artist, which has been our sort of bread and butter at OTOY, where we built Octane and provided Cinema 4D plugins and things like that, great. But I do think that no matter what you're doing, we want the tools to be easy to use, and we want them to be photoreal, right? That's been my goal from the start, and to sort of power these experiences holographically. That 20-year journey, I mean, we putting GPUs in the cloud began really on stage with. Let's see, it's skipping through these slides, but let me go back to this. 12 years ago, I was on stage with Jensen at the GTC keynote, and he had sort of seen what we were doing and tried to do with Dirk Meyer at AMD. And in terms of putting their AMD Radeon cards in the cloud. And he said, okay, Jules, come on stage. I want you to launch your product, which was Octane Render in the cloud. But really, it was GPUs in the cloud that had never really been taken seriously before. And we had just gotten a deal with Amazon to put NVIDIA GPUs in the cloud. I had helped design those systems, the G2 instance on AWS. And we were going to launch Octane as a service on it. And Jensen brought me out, and we showed, Ari's asking about show the Transformers clips. So this was 2013, and we had done the Transformers piece about 6 years before, and we did run it on 100 GPUs. Now it can be run on one, even an iPhone, but that was the genesis of us officially launching cloud rendering. And a year later, we launched it as Octane Render Cloud, and today it's the Render Network. I think that the other part that's important to consider is that the relationship with NVIDIA has continued and persisted for a while. I mean, we're still working with them on their GPUs. They just put out a new RTX Pro GPU with 96 gigs of RAM. That's crazy. And to the point earlier, you're going to see GPUs that come out that are able to do a lot of the stuff that's been done in a data center. It is also important to sort of note the rise of NVIDIA. I mean, this slide really represents Jensen's rise, right? I mean, I was saying that NVIDIA has become 1,000 times more valuable over the course of the last 20 years. And that's because AI has just driven that. I mean, AI in the cloud in particular. And I think that it's just fundamentally, driven a lot of angst. So a lot of our discussions today will talk about how does AI affect us? What is, what's fear-based that's real, what isn't? And some of these headlines are just from, a week ago, really. You have luminaries, many of whom I think have good takes on it. I mean, you have James Cameron saying that effectively, policing AI is really about the output, not the input, not what it's trained on. Because the truth is, that genie is already out of the bottle. There are companies in China and Singapore where there's no laws about using any IP to train an AI model. Those things get put online. Anybody can create content with it. And my premise is that those tools are just new tools. They're not necessarily going to replace, the highest end art that you can do. And, from perspective of a studio head, right, which we're just discussing with Ari, I think her point is, it's still a human-centric world. Humans creating art for humans is what matters. And I agree with that 100%. Now, some people think that maybe that's not going to be the answer either, and that anything that's done with this can be useful, even if it's not really thoughtful or it's just focused on memes. Maybe, but one thing that was really clear is that of all the things that GPUs were really being pushed for with OpenAI's work, it wasn't until they started doing image generation, and that became massively popular, right, with this meme factory that came out a week ago, that you started to get, Sam Altman saying, my GPUs are melting, I need more GPUs. It does point to the fact that it's not just artificial intelligence, ChatGPT style, that's going to drive GPU demand, it's image generation. And that's why Render was started. It was to provide GPUs, distributed, decentralized, DePIN, that could handle all this demand and not have it be centralized, not have it be done just through Amazon or Google or Microsoft or OpenAI. And I think the future for decentralized, and this is a huge part of why Render exists, is very likely and trending our way. The first thing is you do have GPUs from Apple, for example, that have 512 gigs of RAM. You could stick two of those together. You've got a terabyte. That can run the full DeepSeek model, which is as good as anything OpenAI is doing. You have NVIDIA putting out cards that have 96 gigs. You can chain them together to get 192. That starts to give you enough to run a lot of these newer models. The other thing that's changing the world is that a lot of the compute power, right? Render is there to take on as much work as possible, and the more work that goes on the system, the better the render economy does. And things are trending very clearly towards not spending all this money and time pre-training a model, but doing it while the model's actually running at inference time. And all the stuff with reasoning that you're seeing with O1 and DeepSeek R1 is using the GPUs that you're talking to, right, rather than having it all pre-trained. So that means that the hardest thing to do on decentralized training is something that we can move to the endpoint. And then there are even newer techniques. And this one, I don't know if you guys saw this Tom and Jerry 1 minute AI generator. This is crazy because it's doing the shots, right? It's planning out the 1 minute video and it's picking the shots. And the way that this works, and the breakthrough here, is that it's not pre-trained on it as much as it's training itself while it's running. So doing test time training while you're running the job, basically it's learning while it's thinking, and versus all doing this in a pre-step. That's a lot more like how we think as humans, and that's leading to these interesting breakthroughs. But all of that, again, is something that can run more on a single GPU node versus having it be locked into some sort of massive pre-training step. And then you have something called AI agents. I don't know if people that are not in the AI world are tracking that, but basically you have an AI that connects to these services and does things. And for 3D content creation, it can talk to Blender, right? There's an MCP, this is the new API for AI that can run Blender 3D jobs. And this is great because one thing that AI could be useful for, instead of just generating a single image, is can it help assemble a scene? Can it be given certain tasks that could go right into the 3D tools that we as artists use? And for sure, that's already somewhat possible with these tools. So we're seeing this trend sort of accelerate. And I think also, in order for that to work, you want to have multiple, you don't want to have a single polarity of compute. You want to have multiple GPU services out there that can interact. And that trends towards decentralization. That's really where Render comes in, right? I mean, we built this system and launched it 8 years ago to handle the workload for rendering, to leverage all the millions of GPUs that NVIDIA and others have been putting out as consumer GPUs. And I want to sort of showcase some of the things that have been done on Render and also a little bit with Octane. For those that aren't that familiar with rendering, it is used for film, CG, and movies, of course. One of my favorite things that's been done on the Render network was the recreation of certain shots for the 2022 re-release of Star Trek the Motion Picture, my favorite film. I see it, David. I mean, this was done in Octane, didn't even know about it until there was a support ticket, and it was done on the Render Network. So Final Frame Films for studios, I guess this was, you can see the timestamp, 2021. We also have been doing, as Ari was mentioning, the Star Trek project. It's been featured, by Apple in a couple of the keynotes. We can even take these assets and render them on iPads now and then send those to the cloud. And another huge driver of what we've been seeing with Render is doing these high-end renders for things like the Apple Vision Pro, also related to the work we're doing with the archive for Star Trek. And those renders are just massive. I mean, to render something that's panoramic, that's spatial, pushes things even beyond 16K sometimes. Also, I want to note this. This is beautiful. This was done in Octane. The opening of Severance for seasons 1, and you just found out season 2. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's always a great pleasure to find out that your software has been used on something you love, and I do love Severance. I think it's a great show. Also, the Sphere, right? That's 16K by 16K giant set of LEDs. And in fact, MSG was an investor in OTOY because they were, before they had the Sphere, they had similar large format venues. And this is the kind of stuff that Render is absolutely awesome for. We've also had NASA use Render, which is something I'm very proud of and I love. And just looking at some of the recent technical achievements, I mentioned earlier, it's not just our, Octane OTOY's Render, it's also Redshift, which is now fully launched on the Render Network, and there's a huge chunk of the motion graphics industry that uses it, so we're very proud to work with Maxon on supporting that. And we also have recently taken out of beta Blender. And Blender is really interesting because it's got 2 million users. I think there's a huge market, in fact, and so we're pretty excited that we've launched Blender Cycles on the Render Network. In fact, I want to sort of take a minute to talk about our relationship with the Foundation. We've been backing the Blender Foundation for 2 years. That's Tom, the creator of Blender. I think that the future of a lot of what we're going to be talking about connects to Blender because it is open source. You can build, for example, it's pretty straightforward to build AI connections to it. You can modify it. You can run it in all these different environments. So for us, and even though I think there's many more steps, investing in Blender, making it work better with the Render Network, even with Octane, possibly other renders, has been really important. And we're going to continue to invest in the Blender Foundation. I think later this year, maybe towards SIGGRAPH, we'll have some bigger announcements along those lines. But our goal is we want to support Blender for as many things as we can. I mean, we have 26 different 3D tools we do run on, including Unreal and others, but Blender has a really important place because it's so accessible, and there are millions of these users. And it is crazy the way the Foundation runs. I mean, the way that Todd set it up, it is truly like Wikipedia, but for 3D rendering or 3D content creation. And we are using it all over the place. I mean, we mix Blender seamlessly with other things like Cinema 4D and Autodesk 3ds Max, but beautiful work's being done in it. It didn't used to be the case. Blender wasn't, where it is, but I mean, over the last few years, from investment from us, Apple, NVIDIA, Unreal, and others, it's become a much more powerful tool. And I think that now I want to sort of think about, well, where do we take rendering further? What's the future look like? And if you're noticing, I've been trying to predict these things for a while, and I had predictions from 10 years back. So if I look at my GTC talk from 2015, for example, certain trend lines. There was a lot of things where I was like thinking about what's going to matter in the 2020s, and how we spent the 2010s. I mean, it pretty much went according to plan, starting with Octane changing the way that GPU rendering worked from images to full productions, which of course were well past. And I was trying to think about the things that would come in 2025. Immersive. I mean, we have the Apple Vision Pro, real time, of course. We have Unreal driving virtual production. Photorealism, I think, is largely been achieved. And I also would always start my talks with quotes from Tim Sweeney or John Carmack. Actually, Epic invested in OTOY, and Tim Sweeney's been a great supporter and proponent of our work. Same thing with Carmack. But you look at that last piece, right, from 10 years ago. I was like, yeah, it's going to be important. And not just for things like generating images, but just in terms for real time and for games and everything that matters to the world of how we do CGI and video gaming. And now, that's sort of come home full circle. 10 years later, I'm still talking, to and about Tim Sweeney and Carmack. And just recently, Microsoft put out this crazy demo where you're running Quake, but it's completely generated. The video game, not just the image. You're playing it live in a browser. And there's a lot of people that just absolutely reject anything that AI is connected to. So there was a fan of Quake saying, this is absolutely disgusting. And Carmack replied saying, no, it's not. I created the game. I think this is amazing. It's a step forward. These are tools that we can all use to build something even more interesting. And Tim Sweeney basically said the same thing. And this was a week ago. So this is right now. This is this moment in time. I think this is so representative of what's going on in the world, where you've got camps that are against AI because of how it's been trained or what it's worked on. But you're going to see things where it's the creators of these works, where there's such outrage, are absolutely in favor of this happening. And if they understand, like Carmack and Tim Sweeney do, that there's better tools for all of us on the other side of this, then that's, I think, the side that I'm sort of leaning towards. I mean, there's still a ton of bad, horrible things that can be done with AI, especially against artists and creator will, but there's a huge piece of technology that feels a lot to me like CG and 3D and real-time was back in the day when that was sort of taking on a bigger place in the content creation pipelines. One of the comments, though, to this article, right, which is really interesting, was, well, you're going to need this kind of technology. You're going to need an AI that can basically, on the fly, generate a 3D world, because that's how the Star Trek holodeck worked, and we all want that. And that's been a big theme of what I've been talking about from the beginning. The Star Trek holodeck is truly, I mean, this is 1987. This is Encounter at Farpoint on the left. On the right is 2005, the last episode of Enterprise. They're almost bookends to the Star Trek story. And the way that the holodeck works, you go into a room, you get anything you want. It's rendered, right? So for me, it's been a dream to actually see that thing happen, not in 300 years, but today. And I'm not the only one that thinks about this. In fact, you have Jensen talking about the NVIDIA holodeck, and you have everyone from the New York Times and others. I mean, it is sort of this representative goal of how we want to see all of this play out. Because when we watch Star Trek, and I love Star Trek, and it's a huge part of my life, I think of a better world. I think of a future where all this stuff's been figured out, where AI is only there to sort of help with a better human experience. And it also is something that's experientially we want to try to achieve. So getting to these world models is really important. Even Sam Altman, just all these different ends of the spectrum for people approaching AI, just quote the holodeck, right? Straight up say, this is what we want to do. I don't even know how much of a Star Trek fan he is, but it is sort of in the mindset of the world out there that this is something that we want to try to achieve technically, emotionally, philosophically. And I think a year ago, right, so it's really interesting to check the year-by-year progress. Sora was announced. And this was really the crux of my talk a year ago, where I made these slides, and I was showing that for the first time, people can't tell the difference between generated AI video and real video. And this one in particular was something that caught people's attention. It's crazy now that a year later, like Sora is, out of 20 video generation models, is probably the least interesting one. But at the time that I made these slides a year back, it was the only one, and it wasn't even out. But one thing that I mentioned back then, which was super interesting, was if you look at what these video generation models were doing, you're seeing that there's 3D consistency. And even more so, I was like, well, wait a second, let me grab this sort of thing. Let me see if I can extract a 3D model out of this, because I think the AI has a model in latent space. And I did. That's me taking the, basically generating a NERF, neural radiance field, from just one frame, or a few frames of it. And you can absolutely see that the AI does have a 3D model. And this points towards the future where, yeah, you can have AI render a scene. Now, is it traced, or is it handled with neurons? That's a big question. That's a technical question. I think it's going to be a mixture of both those things. And that gets back to this big trend line towards what is everybody saying they want to do with their generative models, world models. In other words, everything is generated in real time, on demand, and that does feel a lot like a video game. And ultimately, as a video game developer, as a content creator that uses CG, this is something that feels like it's important. And the paper that Microsoft put out in conjunction with showing Quake running in real time was talking about their early steps. But I think it's important to talk a little bit about the core pieces of the technology for how this would work for artists creating 3D. So instead of having a 3D model as we traditionally think of it, you train an AI on what the model is, maybe different viewpoints, maybe send it the mesh. In our case, when we were doing early tests, we would just give it 100 images. It would then create, not a Gaussian splatter over, but an actual latent space model in memory, in the neural network, in this tissue of connected things. It knows what the enterprise looks like, and you can ask it for a view, and it can render it. If it's trained on just that, it looks a lot like a 3D model. And that's the kind of stuff that is much more interesting for all of us as content creators than just hitting a prompt and getting back an image or a video. So, this is a huge part of the future of rendering. One of the coolest parts about how this works is that you can take a photo, any photo, right, from history, like the Apollo 11 moon landing, and you today can go to ChatGPT, and they just put out 2 weeks ago this image generator, right? The more interesting for me is that you can test how good that image generator is in understanding what a 3D model is of the photo you're sending. It's really good, actually. So you can give it this photo. It'll give you a wireframe of it. It has a basic understanding of the scene, which is what I was saying a year ago, right? There's a 3D model somewhere in latent space. If only you could extract that and use it as a 3D model in a game or in a 3D pipeline for content creation, you'd have something amazing. And that's what OTOY is working on, and that's what we want to build for the render network as a tool. So the problem is, though, that AI is a little bit messy. Even the ChatGPT thing, right? It starts to lose track of what the original image is. It drifts. It becomes, you get a finger added here and there. It's not great, but there is progress being made. So this is something that's a huge breakthrough, I think, technically. We can take an AI. This is just generated it from Higgs, a new service that I use. Can generate an image, but I can take that generation and I can bring that now. On the bottom is Octane, our software, right? And I can run it in the traditional 3D scene. Octane's a little grainy because it's running real ray tracing, and I can move it around, and I can treat it like a 3D object with the reflections and all that. And that's a huge breakthrough. So if you can generate something, not just a simple 3D mesh that doesn't look like the original, but anything that AI can do can come into the scene as a 3D object, that's a big deal. And that makes creating things, let's say, with precision and control much more interesting. So if we wanted to recreate a scene in history, for example, from the 40s and World War II, you can give it the mesh of the boat. You can basically mix and match different pieces together. But ultimately, the idea is that it could be rendered like your traditional CG pipeline. And this is much more of a useful piece of kit than I think anything that I've seen from the pure generative models. I mean, it's great for meme generation when you can type in text and get something back. But even talking to the guys that that created Flux, the image generator, and there you go. I mean, you can do a lot of crazy things with a mixture of neural rendering and traditional 3D. I think even the guys that are creating these AI models don't want to have text to image or video be the way forward. I think that's maybe okay for concept art. So I think that we should look at some of the things that aren't part of this future pipeline. So for example, text to image to a 3D mesh, it's possible. Here's an example of that works successfully from 2 photos. You can see here this is running on Creo, which does some really good work. And using a model called Tripo, it's able to extract a 3D model and takes 32 seconds. And I can then bring that model into Octane. Is it great? No, but it's not bad. So if you're just doing blocking things for concept art and you want to give it an image and give back a 3D model, this works 25% of the time, and it's okay. But it's interesting. This is so much better than it was like 3 weeks ago. I mean, this is how fast things are moving in this space that 3 weeks from now, I'll probably have a whole different set of slides if I were to give this talk again. And there's a lot of value maybe in having a single part generated for a larger 3D scene you're building. So this is an example of somebody on the team that was testing building like a single piece that goes into a larger part of a 3D scene that you're building traditionally. That may be more useful. There's also work being done with just taking photogrammetry, which is now best exemplified by Gaussian splats. And those are really good. I mean, those are much more towards, they're closer to the neural rendering pipeline that we're imagining and we're about to show more work on, but you can't really relight these things. That's one limitation. And I would say the text to image, the stuff that we're using and seeing this, online and all these different services, where does that fit in? I mean, the thing is, that's neural rendering, sure, but it's to 2D, and it's hard to control because it is 2D, right? But here's me testing. We had a shot in our recent structure piece that we had to, it didn't work on set, and we didn't even end up using it really in the piece. So I ran it through every single video model. This was like last week, and they all sucked. None of these things were usable for production at all in 2024. And we worked with the Luma guys, Runway, many others, and this was as of a week ago. I mean, every single model, Sora, Google Veo, all of them. I mean, just not usable. It only was 2 days ago where I was finally able to get one. This is off of Higgs, that gave me something that actually worked pretty well. So these things are moving forward. But what I really want is just give me the 3D scene and let me then mix and match it like I would as a 3D artist, so that the artist is in control. And that's basically what we're working on. And there's a lot of parts of the production pipeline, even outside of CG, where the technology that OTOY has been working on and that we want to also bring into render make sense. The render network, effectively, we're adding all the services. So if you want to use one of these generative models even in Octane and launch something and bring back the data, you can do that. We've added those. But I think that we're going to be building on that and shipping many more interesting pieces in the coming months. Here's an example of something that goes right back to the practical world of prosthetics and makeup. And if you've seen anything we're doing on the Starfruit pieces, I call the face replacement digital prosthetics, because it truly is something that is coming from the world of makeup and the physical. So I had the team test this. I've been showing different slides of makeup transfer. I love to show the penguin. Colin Farrell gets transformed into the penguin. It's an actual physical prosthetic. He spends 4 hours in the makeup chair. And one of the things we wanted to change was, is this necessary? Can we take something like this and simplify this so it doesn't take 4 hours? And so this is just an internal test that we were doing to see if we could even build that model. And we didn't, we just basically did photogrammetry on pictures of the sculpt. There it is back in Octane, right? So we have the 3D model of it. And I just had the team just give me a digital prosthetic that is mapped, no dots on my face, so that I could just try this out and see how it worked. And this is in real time, by the way. This is running on a single 4090, and I am now the penguin. And it's a makeup thing. It's not giving me the penguin's face. It's putting the actual physical prosthetic, that 3D model, on me and matching it in real time, giving me the teeth even, right, which we also had the team build. And it's pretty crazy. That's in real time. So if you're, and one of the things we'll be talking about today is, as an actor or performer, you can just seamlessly have things like that happen and be created. And for the work we're going to be showing with Star Trek, going back a few years, we have actor Lauren Selleck, who's been playing Spock. We started with nothing digital. We just put him in a physical prosthetic, and it was, again, it took hours. It was complicated and a lot of work. But we started there, and then we slowly had the pieces where we could replace those prosthetics with even better pieces that were digital. And this was 3 years ago. We were doing tests where this was, again, live, running on a GPU. So Lawrence could see himself as Spock on the monitor, and this was without the without the physical prosthetics. I think one of the first tests, and it looked really good, really good. So from there, we also been looking at, can we take scenes and scan them in and bring them into Octane as really high quality 3D assets, relight them. I mean, we could sort of do that for static stuff, that was scanned in the light stage. And now what we can do is, for example, this is a 6K render. What you guys saw with me in the penguin mask was real time. But this is a full head replacement, and it's beautiful. I mean, it really does hold up well, and that, I think, is something that's pretty unique with this tech, is that you can use it for full production, and it looks absolutely amazing. The other part is it's not a deepfake, right? It's a 3D model, so I can take the actual thing that I'm seeing, and I can even include that with the scan of the set and the actors I'm doing it, and I can move this thing as a 3D object in real time. That feels like a traditional CG pipeline or even a video game. And by the way, this is real time for, in the last piece we did, Spock was old. It was, 80-year-old Leonard, basically. And we basically didn't have any really great reference for that. So we built a 3D model. We scanned in his life mask. And that was the basis for how we did the Spock prosthetic. But you can see this is, this is a full 3D model that I can look around, and I can bring that in Octane. This is the latest nightly build of Octane in real time, and it's incredible. So this is not just for final frame rendering. This is something that could be used in the future for games. I mean, this is running on a single laptop, and it's incredibly powerful. We can also relight it. Remember, I think Gaussian splats are really great, but you can't relight them easily. This can do that. And so this is a great example of where tech is going that effectively empowers artists that have existing tools with existing workflows with something that I think is pretty magical. And of course, a lot of this goes and touches on the ethics of what we're doing with the kind of technology where we can take Leonard Nimoy's likeness and put it on Lauren Selleck and do these pieces of content in video games. And I think there's a lot of philosophical discussions, some of which we're going to have on our talks today, about what does this mean? I mean, you have people that are looking to start relationships with AI and have even sort of committed to that lifestyle. And there's so many crazy things that this affects. But I go back again to the world that Gene Roddenberry created and imagined, which was beautiful. And there was a moment in my favorite movie, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where there's this decision where Decker, one of the characters, decides that what AI is missing is love and the human connection, and merges with it and goes into the singularity. And it's this beautiful moment that I love in the film. It's deep, it's profound, and it's the unknown. And it does almost, to me, represent an ideal introspection of what it means to be human, what all of this possibly can mean for us in a positive, optimistic way. And by the way, Kirk doesn't join. He just keeps going and living his life. And in Gene Roddenberry's book about the movie, the one and only book he wrote on Star Trek, right, Kirk is there to sort of almost show people, like, you have to go out there in the world, you have to explore, you have to bring in new data. And on Earth, in the Star Trek novel that Gene wrote, there's people called the New Humans. They live in VR, and it's just, there's a cycle where these don't have any experiences that sort of add to the staleness of their lives. So lots of great philosophy in Star Trek. A lot of it encompassed not just in the motion picture film, but in the novel that Gene wrote. As Ari and I mentioned, I mean, and here's Amat who will be speaking on the next panel with me. Standards are important. Working with SAG and all these other organizations, really critical to create the frameworks where there's sort of clear lines between what you can and can't do with AI, especially people's likenesses. But we're just at the beginning of a pretty crazy journey, I think, into that world. And I think I've talked a lot about, of course, the impact that Star Trek's had. I want to actually talk about the project that we're doing, which really started with my best friend, Rod Roddenberry, sitting in the front row here 20 years ago, to document in any way we can the life and work of Gene Roddenberry. And Rod's been doing this for years with documents and photos and things like that. And even 20 years ago, I remember, I think the enterprise that Ari saw was actually something that Jeff Holman, who's artist that's been working with me for 20-something years, had created for Paramount. We've been playing with these pieces for a while. But about 3 years ago, we decided to go full tilt and have OTOY work on just rebuilding everything digitally, everything from the world of Star Trek. Right? So a lot of the things you're seeing about this project came from that intention. And so, yes, we have these incredible documents. Gene Roddenberry writing letters to Steve Jobs, photos of the cast and crew during the filming of Star Trek. So the archive itself was created. Rod invested in OTOY 15 years ago, and I consider that as an endowment. And that did help, start this project where we were starting to build 3D models. We focused a lot on the enterprise, because it is, in some ways, a character on the show. And not just on how it appeared in the show, but also in production. Like, this is the set where it was filmed, and this is a 3D model of it, so you can explore that. And one of the goals that we've had from the beginning is, let's build the actual motion picture enterprise. Why? Because we have the deck plans for it. Lord Johnson, that's the only ship that we have every single piece for. And it's taking us years, but we eventually want to have a full, complete digital double of that ship, life size, right? For me, that's a passion project. And we're doing it. I mean, we have almost all the interiors that have been, you've seen on screen, built. That was actually 3 years ago. We're building the entire universe around it. So it is, in some ways, a virtual world simulator that's in the universe of Star Trek. And you can see these beautiful cutaways of the ship. It sort of drives, for a Star Trek fan, I think, a lot of strong feelings of imagination, and just seeing this world come to life has been just a pleasure, both, I think, to have the experience as a fan's perspective, but also creating it. This is the interactive portion where you can go on the set and see and experience it. But there's also a lot more than just that original enterprise. I mean, there's all the designs that went into it. When we're talking the meta version of it, we're talking about the history of Star Trek, which is there's 14 enterprises, right? So if you just look at some of the earlier work, you can even see you can do time lapses through the world of Star Trek. And that's the thing, is I think the future of content is multimodal. I mean, you want to, of course, see movies and have this story told. That's why these things matter. But if you love what you're seeing, like many Star Trek fans do, then being able to explore that world in almost the same experience, which is what the archive represents, is beautiful. And to Ari's point earlier about this goal of, well, what you film and what you create for movies is something you can reuse for video games. I mean, we effectively have that working today, and using that for this project. These sets you're seeing, we can run that on a volume and an air wall, which we have in the venue, and you can try yourself. And we can actually film things on there. When we launched the archive, it was, people loved it. We had like 4 million visitors in the first week, and Smithsonian, everyone was delighted by it. And we eventually worked our way towards pulling a VR version of this thing, and we've official licensing from Paramount for this immersive experience license, and we launched that with Apple, launched the Vision Pro in February of last year. If you are able to see the Vision Pro that we have set up there, you can see this experience, which is you can see the world of Star Trek brought outside of outside of it and brought into the real world, and this is a beautiful and amazing experience. And to my point earlier about things maybe moving towards a holographic future, I think this is a really important way of testing that. I mean, the Vision Pro is still early days, right? There's under 1 million of these out there, but if you want to experience what it would be like to see things in your space with the highest fidelity possible today, that's the device to do it on. And it's been a challenge, really, to sort of build the right pipeline for this and do the content. I mean, it's just, imagine if you actually had the holodeck, how the UX for that would work. It would be pretty crazy, right? But we're going through that, and of course, the challenges for rendering things at this level. Even Apple, I mean, I think they're still working on their immersive media format. The experiences themselves are going through a lot of iterative changes. But in our case, we figured, well, the one thing that we should do, if we're going to do the holodeck, is let's render holograms, which we can do on the render network, right? And then give you back an actual cube-sized hologram you can just move quickly through. This is one of those cubes. This is a light field. It's effectively a really quick lookup table, which would be like a digital hologram, and we can run that on the Vision Pro, and you can see that in the archive, and we can do that for anything. This takes a lot of GPUs to render, but again, easy to do on the render network. Going back to the parts of the archive that sort of led us to where we are today, we started to do, in addition to these beautiful documentary pieces and letting people explore the world of Star Trek in 3D and Gene Roddenberry's other works as well, we started to put out little vignettes that would accompany these other pieces. And we've done 4 of these. The third one, which I'm going to show here, we put that out right after Star Trek Picard Season 3, where they just showed the Enterprise D, and it turns out, oh, this thing was recovered from the planet. In the novels, at the moment of Kirk's death, and even in the comics, right, Spock goes to visit Kirk's grave. This was something that fans knew about, but it was never shown on screen. So we figured, as part of the archive, let's do something that touches on all these elements, and let's put this out there shortly after this episode airs. And I'm going to play this next, and we can take a look at it. It's 2 minutes long. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we're very proud of that piece. I mean, this was 23, so we were, early days with a lot of the tech and tools that we had then. But every CG scene was done on the render network, right? I mean, we absolutely depend on that for production. Octane as well, and of course, our early work with doing digital prosthetics for faces was put to even greater effect on in those couple of scenes with Spock. But people really loved it. I mean, the feedback was great, and when we were doing the piece that followed, right, which we're going to have a whole panel to discuss. The cast and crew will be there to discuss it. It is 8 minutes long, so I'm not going to show it here. We'll be playing it before the panel that's coming up next. It's called Unification. This is a beautiful poster done by a fan. It was an incredible piece, and I think that so you've seen some snippets from it. I'm going to talk a little bit, at least show some pieces ahead of our talks, so you can sort of see some of the work and behind-the-scenes stuff that went into it. There's a lot of beautiful things that were created for it, and it was touching. I mean, that piece with Spock that you just saw, I mean, we had a few million people, I think, see it. This one, this is part of the immersive experience, right? So it's inside of the Vision Pro app, it's inside of the web portal, but the link from YouTube that was unlisted, 26 million people watched it. That's crazy. It was beautiful. It was so well received. For those that haven't seen it, please go either watch it in the theater or come back right before the talk to see the full thing. But the making of it was crazy. And also, the day that we put it out there, right? So, spoiler alert, Kirk's back. We had William Shatner, who's an executive producer on it, there watching it with everybody. And there's Robin, Larry, who plays Spock, my wife, May, who plays Colt, and who's there at the very beginning of these things with me, and inspired me to get into filmmaking at all. But he, Bill hadn't seen, I mean, he'd seen some early tests, but he hadn't seen the whole thing until that day, that moment, the day that this came out, and he was sitting in the captain's chair. We're all around him watching it. I'm going to play sort of, something that Larry filmed of Bill at the end when the piece was done. Yeah, it was emotional for all of us, and it was very, very, very nerve-wracking for me because obviously this was bringing Kirk back in any way, shape, or form was crazy. And it took a little bit of time to even have him agree to do this at all, but we've been working with him for years. We'd interviewed him for the archive. And in fact, what inspired Unification for me was the last minute of his interview that he did in March of 23, where he said this.
We were brothers, and I loved it.
It's about Leonard.
And a few months before he died, I don't know, something happened, and I don't know what it is. And I've been assured by both of his children that he loved me, but he stopped talking to me. And I couldn't break through. And towards the end, I was told he was dying. I wrote him a letter saying how much I loved him and how I regret not seeing him. And he died. And I don't know to this day. I'm told stories by people who said to me, that happened to me. And it was because of the illness. And their minds, they weren't thinking exactly the same way. So I'd like to think that was it. That as he got further and further along with his emphysema, that it wasn't something I did because I loved him.
Yeah. So I called him shortly after that with Ari, and I said, listen, I want to do a piece with, you made me feel that the closure between Kirk and Spock didn't happen, right? I mean, Spock and Kirk died off screen, at least Spock died off screen, and the characters never got to say goodbye. So for me, even though, of course, we're documenting the story of Star Trek, emotionally, that was an important piece that I know was missing. And so with that, he, after almost a year of conversations, he agreed to let us do this. And we even considered and gave him the option of coming in and de-aging him, which we can do. In the end, he effectively chose to have an actor play a younger Kirk. He did provide guidance on using his voice, but Sam Witwer, who's an incredible actor, who'd been working with me for 2 years before we put out this piece to be Kirk and help us with the actual technology for the digital prosthetics that you guys are seeing. It is amazing. And at the end, I'm very proud of the piece. We show Kirk at different ages. Initially, we were going to have Spock and Kirk at the different ages. That was cut. But you can see here there's Sam on set without the digital prosthetics and with...
I think I was 26, 27 when I came in. How do you account for that? The age, and am I still recognizable? How would you do that? I mean, science fiction's filled with magic, so you could do it. Because we live in science fiction.
So yeah, I mean, he was, while he was giving the earlier interview, he was talking about how to bring Kirk back, how to make him younger. I also reminded him that, you know, this is something we can do. So the first thing we did is we just de-aged him to 60, the age that Kirk would have been from 93. And he saw that. He's like, oh, that looks perfect. But is there a way for me to look like this and not be on set? Because, you know, a lot of the filming was torturous, you know, Huntington Gardens and things like that. So that's when we did.
Crew was due to step down in
That's
6
Sam.
months. We've done our bit for King and Country.
Talking, right? So, you know, we didn't have them talking the piece, but you can see that we actually can do voices and everything really well. And when Bill saw that, he's like, just go with that. You know, it de-aging me and having Sam effectively do the same thing, you're going to basically have a better system there, and that's how we proceeded. So the crazy thing is, it's real time. So here I am. This is on a 4090 laptop. Sam this is the first time we're actually testing him as Generations Kirk, and it's just mind-blowing. I mean, I posted this on Twitter. For Spock, it was a lot more challenging. As I mentioned before, we had to build a 3D model of Leonard at that age, and, you know, for Spock Prime. But, you know, we did it. And then we also brought in Robin Curtis from the legendary Star Trek actress, and brought her in as an older version of her character, Saavik. There's a scene that was cut, which is from the early Voyages comic book that was meant to sort of describe what's going on in the piece, where she's de-aged. And this is from the set. It's pretty amazing.
She is precisely the young woman who vanished that day aboard the Enterprise.
However, there is a problem. Her temporal integrity is decaying. She is alien to this timeline, and it is beginning to reject her. If she is not returned to her natural time frame soon, she will perish.
If you're a Star Trek fan, that's pretty crazy. So, you know, it's something where de-aging and being able to take CG characters and blend them together. For example, Gary Lockwood, who is 87, we brought him back as Gary Mitchell. There's a lot of really, you know, interesting pieces unification pushed us to do, and we've learned so much from it, and we're taking all of that and applying it to the next set of things that we're taking on. Again, we come from a world of movies. Physical props are important. We built Arix, which is one of the characters from Star Trek, the original series, really only showed us a cartoon. We built a CG version. People went crazy when we showed that years ago. And so we did a physical model. We tried to film it. And we are now thinking, how do we animate this physical model, right? So we're doing early tests with that. We do have a lot of work that can basically take and map you know, performance to a physical sculpture or makeup. And you know, it's getting there. It's still early days, but we're working on that. And as we were filming unification, there again, there were shots where it was, you know, we filmed it all live action, you know, with cranes, dolly operators. But there was a shot in particular where we needed to redo it, right? But we scanned in everything. I mean, we had cameras on set, so we could. There was one shot where Kirk meets Yor, where we redid it and did it all in CG, and it worked great. So we've always, when we're filming things, we always do full coverage, and we bring that back into Octane. But then again, we have a larger world that we're also creating in Octane that looks gorgeous. These are all renders from the opening scene of that, of unification, and it's just beautiful. And we had one shot, there's no AI video generator that was able to do this, where we go from the sky, full CG shot, to Kirk's feet, which is a live action plate. And we tried Runway, we tried Luma. Even to this day, it wouldn't work. So the traditional pipeline of rendering mixed with compositing was the only thing that got this to work. But it was just an amazing shot. It was very ambitious, and it worked great. Lots of set replacement. We could do this differently now. The volume, of course, was popularized by The Mandalorian. But again, we're working towards being able to do much more of this in real time. And I think you'll see, I mean, Richard and Karis from Video will be talking in our next panel, predicting 70% of films would be shot this way. But we also could do multiple camera views for face replacement as well. And I'm going to end by just showing some of the tests we did. This is in the middle of the production for unification, testing the TMP era, Kirk and Spock. This one is again, it's just a test, so it's just an early thing, but it looks pretty cool.
I think I like that, Mr. Spock. I commanded a ship named after an idea.
not bad for last year, right? So I think that if that's something, and remember, everything I've shown you, you can move the camera around. You can basically experience that in the holodeck. That's the point of making films that are leveraging this technology. And the artists have full control. You have Sam and Larry playing Kirk and Spock. You have artists building these sets. It's an artist-driven pipeline. And whatever we're doing at Render, at OTOY, we want artists and humans to be at the center of that. And I think that actually is our place in this future. So I want to have one more thing before we close out, just a sort of moment of Zen before we go on to the rest of the conference. And I'll play this, and then we'll wrap up.
Things that we see on Star Trek at the holodeck. What kinds of things can you imagine that are partway there that could be much better than the 3-window iChat that we might see in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I don't think Steve's going to announce his transporter.
I want Star Trek. Just give me Star Trek.
Amen. And I think that's the future that we want to. So again, I'm so excited for you to all be here today. We have some incredible guests and panelists. We have an incredible venue. And thank you for being part of this important day in the journey of rendering. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the show.